Hey everyone. So the topic for today is quite interesting, and that's something that I've seen come up as a theme in conversations multiple times over the last few months, and I thought it's probably a good time to open up a tree, stream of thought and make this conversation open to a broader audience. And hence here we are, and looking at doing this event today. So let me just share my screen and get started with this. 1 second. Yes. Amazing. So I hope you all can see my screen. So the topic for today that we've been thinking about discussing for a while, and getting everyone's thoughts was what happens to ownership and accountability as we get more and more deeper into the autonomous agents and into implementation of agents within our day-to-day work life cycles, right? So that's the primary agenda around which we're going to have this conversation. But before we jump into any of this, let's look at a simple let's look at a simple conversation that could be happening in our teams, in any of your teams. And this is something that I believe some of you might be able to resonate with, right? So just yeah, I hope you guys can hear me, right? So yes. So this let's just look at this conversation, right? There's this manager who's saying that, hey, two enterprises have pinged me that there's some boardroom demo, and there's this 5xx that's coming out and checkout, and is Stack the engineer asking, hey, did you do the schema migration from this PR? What's happening? And he's like, yeah, this is mine. To be honest, I asked, like, basically it's like I asked Claude to do it, and Claude did it, and that's what it told me. But it looks like something went wrong and I don't know what. So that's the kind of situations that a lot of us end up having today, which is quite natural, to be honest, simply because when we look at today's when we look at today's evolution of the agentic world, it's super unclear on what actually is the ownership of an engineer versus what actually is the ownership of a agent, or at least, like, there's fuzzy boundaries. I wouldn't say just unclear, but like fuzzy boundaries, right? So how do you draw that distinction, and where do you build that line out, right? So that's where we are operating. Yeah. Does this make sense? Anyone here who can resonate to this, has any comments? Awesome, perfect. So the first thing we'll touch upon today is, before we jump into anything, let me give you a quick introduction about me and DrDroid. Right. So I'm Sid. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DrDroid. Before this, I was a data scientist at a startup called Shadowfax, and I was also an investor at Axel, where I used to look at companies in security, SaaS, and observability areas. Right. So before we go further ado, a little bit about the startup that I represent is DrDroid. We build intelligence layer, we build AI agents which are designed for production infrastructure, for production problems that enterprises face on a day-to-day basis, and we help them to basically reduce the MTTR, increase the MTBF, which is mean time between failures. And yeah, while without any ado, let's further go ahead and discuss what we actually are here for, right? So one of the things that all of us have to be cognizant of is the understanding of what agents are capable of. Because if you look at maybe like a year ago, the coding agentic coding scene was primarily most of cursor and lovables and all of that. But when you look at like 6 months ago, when Claude Code actually became mainstream and everyone was getting onto that, by November, it was like everyone was in Claude Code. And the way it's happening today, most of the engineers forget reviewing code, like forget writing code. They don't even review code, right? So the capability of agents that the team is using at any point in time is changing. And the rule of thumb here is that the KPIs that humans are going to own consistently are going to be a order of magnitude higher than what agents are currently able to do. Now, as the agents improve, these KPIs are going to change, right? Before we actually jump into any further, one important clarification that needs to be put out here is what is an agent versus what is an assistant. Now, when something is operating only under the purview of a single person, and only that single person interacts with an LLM for a specific query, that's more of an assistant of the human, right? Where the human is taking assistance from that, you know, that LLM, from that, although it's an agentic architecture, but an assistant to get the answer. Versus, in my opinion, agents are when, it's a shared context between more than one people, and it is being leveraged in either a, background, or in an autonomous way, where, people don't necessarily have to, like the agent itself. If there are three people in the conversation with the agent, the ownership of making a mistake in the agent will go back to the shared responsibility of improving the agent, and not necessarily to one person in the team having to take that ownership, right? That's where I see this happening. And when we look at the entire software infrastructure realm, I think it's changing rapidly today. Until today, we were primarily in the human ownership era of software monitoring, but I think very soon we are going to move to a, agentic ownership era. And we are seeing this with some of our customers already, wherein, they don't assign issues to, they don't assign issues to engineers directly, but let the agents do most part of the work. And when an issue looks critical, that's when they actually involve agents into the limelight, and actually get in agents into the actually get in humans into the, picture. So that's something that we're seeing consistently with our customers, and the way we are seeing it, it's only a matter of a couple of years before the primary purpose of most folks in the platform team, in the reliability team, the architects, will be more around, okay, how do we consistently make the agents context better, how do we consistently improve the quality of agents and the quality of work that they are able to deliver, and how can we unblock them, and by them I mean like agents, instead of having to, actually tackle day-to-day issues. I do think that is somewhere where we see the future improving. And as we get more and more agentic, there will be a lot more proactiveness and preventiveness that can be baked into the systems, because, compute is not compute is not exactly the same unit of work as is a human effort, right? Because in a human effort, you're getting the person on the call. Even if you escalate an issue to a human, probably doesn't happen in 10 seconds, right? It at least takes like 5 to 10 minutes. Versus when you're looking at an agent, it can basically get started within a couple of seconds, and the process can be significantly faster. So the way I'm looking at the future, most part of operations will be run preemptively and proactively, and the number of incidents that happen per unit of infrastructure will significantly reduce, because of the way the agents will be, working on the maintenance, on the operations, and operating across the stack. Companies that we are operating, we are already seeing that early adoption of agents is actually removing the ownership, or transitioning the ownership from humans to, agents. And for example, one of our customers, they have a broad stack of tooling. They are on all the three clouds. They have CoreLogics, they have Grafana, GitHub, Confluence, Jira, Opsgenie, a bunch of different toolings. And for them, a typical root cause investigation would take, like, at least 20 minutes, up to 60 minutes, even longer. Multiple tools, the engineers are going in and checking in. 5+ team members are involved across different teams, just because the context is so scattered. Whereas with DrDroid, the one engineer, the one agent that understands the entire production infrastructure, is able to investigate and typically respond within 5 minutes. And wherever there is a need for humans to be involved is typically where there are approvals that are to be given to the, agent by humans. So that's been the transition that I am seeing. And I think, let me just come back to that. But the way I see this is that, the agents will get promoted more and more as per their capabilities. For example, yes. Yes. For example, in development today, we are seeing more, it's more assistant based, where humans are still owning it. And, agents are just, the cloud code in my IDE that's helping me. But the way I see the future is more and more things will transition to a layer where, you just write a spec, and that spec is put into a cloud environment, where there is a, QA environment enabled, and it's effectively mimicking the test environments that engineers spin up on their locals, and that would have the Cloud Code instance running there. And in that case, right, in that case, the ownership of doing a QA, doing the UAT, will transition from the humans to the agents, right? That would be a significant delta, in my opinion, because today development is primarily the ownership of an engineer, irrespective of whatever AI agents they are using as assistants. Now, coming to another example, could be in case of even incident investigations. Today, a lot of people use their own MCP servers in Cloud Code sessions, investigate it, then copy paste the RCA findings and share it on a channel that, okay, this is what I found. Now, this is still a human owned, because whatever they are copying, pasting, the responsibility of the answer is of that individual who did that. Versus the way we see most companies transitioning is, you have centralized bots that are supposed to, centralized agents that are supposed to respond with an answer, and it is the responsibility of the overall engineering org to make sure that the answers that are coming are as close to being accurate as possible, and that it can be relied on. Because at that point, the agent becomes a teammate instead of an assistant, and you are not copying the an insight or the analysis that the agent has done and sharing it with someone. Instead, you are using that to make your own judgment call, right? That's the transition that I see happening over the next few years, wherein it will transition from being human owned to agent owned. And I think this is something that's moving across scenarios. Another example could be alert acknowledgement, right? Today, most alerts are manually acknowledged by humans, and obviously you can use LLMs for enriching them, getting some insights on in the response to those alerts automatically. But the way I see the future is, all of these alerts will be sent or routed via a agent, like an agentic middleware, where all alerts come to the agent first, and then they get triaged by the agent. It decides whether it's related to some of the other alerts that are coming in by potential root causes, and then if needed, either raises a fix, recommends a suggestion, or even escalates it to another team or an engineer human who could be able to act better here, right? So that transition is where I see that where, but at the end of the day, these transitions would require that the agents are able to autonomously do a broader scope of task, right? For example, today, in most cases, people do the assistant led development also, is because the harness, if you need to make sure that your harness that you have set up is good enough for the agent to be able to do autonomous QA on the browser in your environment, be it on local or in cloud, right? But the quality or the expectation of a platform that you use or a tooling that you use for it to get autonomous is significantly higher than what it is for you to be an assistant, right? So that difference is what we see day in day out, where organizations, we take ownership in organizations outcomes in RCAs when we work with production grade environments, instead of promising them just an assistant that behaves similar to how they might build it in house, right? Now, taking another look at it, right, there is another direction in which you can look at this same concept, and this is simply from the scope of looking at it from the jobs to be done framework, right? So there are so many different jobs to be done that each engineer is on a day-to-day basis involved in. Like, if you're an infrastructure engineer, you're a SRE, you might do a bunch of these tasks that are mentioned on the screen here. You might look at multiple things in parallel, and when you look at the task that you're able to give to the agent, it should be more oriented towards each of these tasks that are there in the jobs to be done framework for your role. And within that, how much of a expanded role can the agent have? That's the whole modus operandi of working on agents, right? Like, okay, sure, now till today, after a deployment, the post deployment sanity checks are all happening by your team members. Now, when you are able to get a agent up which has good context about what to look for in terms of post production reviews, post production deployment checks, that agent could be deployed as a post release review agent, where now it sends an update on the Slack channel, and the ownership of you know tracking the anomaly is of the human, but did the anomaly happen or not is of the agent, right? Now, why did that anomaly happen? Okay, do we need to respond to that anomaly? That could still be the responsibility of a human to make a judgment call, whether it's actually an anomaly, or is it a non-actionable anomaly, versus if it is actually an anomaly, is there an anomaly or not? That's not the burden of an engineer as we see it in the future, right? So each of these tasks are going to get more and more into the zone where agents pick up broader part of it and humans pick up fewer parts of it. Now the thing about these is all of these tasks, they move to an agentic ownership as and when the accuracy, as and when the effectiveness of doing those tasks with the agent is great, right? Because if it is feeling at this with a higher percentage, then in those cases running it with a human led ownership is the better model to run. Whereas where the hence what I was saying around the evals of an agent being critical is that as your evals improve, you will be able to hand over more and more tasks to the agents. But until then, an internal collaborative communication is super critical for teams to be able to establish what is the responsibility of the engineer, what is the responsibility of the agent, and how that splits across the team, right? Yeah. I think broadly I've covered most of the points. Now, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them up. Pratik, do let me know if there are any questions. And apart from that, while the conversation here is primarily anchored around how autonomy is built out, one of the things to just to recollect here for the team, for the folks who are attending, is what at Dr. Droid, what we are building is the brain of this software infrastructure, right? So you have a complex architecture, a sprawl of tools across different categories. Like you have multiple cloud providers, you have your containers, you have your Kubernetes, you have your telemetry providers. What we do at Dr. Droid is we build a context engine or a decision engine that is self-learning from every activity that's happening in your infrastructure and improving itself, so that it's like when you then use it in context of a production debugging. So you have an LLM, you have an MCP server, and you have this decision engine. Now this decision engine comprises of information across different components, across different tools, and the context that is as it is updated, right? For example, if there is an incident that happened yesterday, it would know what that incident was about, what services were impacted, how they were correlated. And if a month ago a similar incident happens again, that's already pre-saved in the context engine on where the risks are higher, right? Which nodes within the entire infrastructure, and within those nodes, what edges within those have higher probability of being prone to failures or not being prone to failures. So this decision engine is what we are building at Dr. Droid, and that helps enterprises, that helps larger scale of infrastructure to be managed easily across the different life cycles of post production. Post production life cycle. Yes. So this is where we are in terms of the overall conversation. I'm happy to take up if there are any further questions, any further discussions or comments here. Feature today, and yes, so we just launched a new feature today, alert grouping. Right. So I just wanted to how do I open this? Yes. Let me just play this video for your context and take it.
Drowning in alert noise in your Slack? Everything feels flooded. Datadog alerts, sentry errors, log spikes, all firing at once, all for the same incident. And you don't know which is important? What if your alerts could group themselves? Introducing Alert Grouping by DrDroid. This is your alert room. Every alert from Datadog, Sentry, and your logs lands here, already grouped by DrDroid, with suppressed noise right alongside. Expand any group and you see exactly what got folded together. Related alerts, tagged and explained. Every similar alert lands in the same group. And grouped alerts become one issue, with a priority, a status, and one owner. And for alerts you already know are noise, routing rules, the grouping agent profile lets you customize grouping behavior at any time. So you will get less noise and faster root cause. Sign up or book a demo with us and we will give you a walk through how it works.
Amazing. Yes. So this is about the alert grouping capability that we have in Dr. Droid. Now, the way the alert grouping operates, let me just show you. You see related alerts that are basically impacting or having the root cause, which is potentially correlated to each other, get grouped together and are showcased within the platform under a single umbrella. Now, what this helps you with as an engineer is to reduce the overhead of having to track each alert. And basically, you sometimes might not get to a critical alert if you spend a lot of time on alerts that are noisy, that are not actually actionable for your team, versus when you have a visibility of these incidents being grouped together by alerts, like by the root causes. You need to basically look at a fewer set of issues and focus more on the actual issues instead of looking at every alert in the system, right? So that's the overall concept here. And let me just drop in the link for the release as well, so that in case you have a minute, you can check it out and take a look at this. Yeah, I think Pratik, you can put it on LinkedIn as well, right? So yes, this was the brief webinar that we had today, and the overall discussion that we wanted to do today. If there is anything else that anyone would like to discuss, I'm happy to take that up as well, and have another conversation here. Amazing, Pratik. Should we uh, wrap up the overall webinar? Okay, everyone. Thank you. I think this was right on time. We are at the 30-minute mark, and we've been able to wrap this up right on time. So, yeah, I hope this was helpful in terms of the framework for thinking on what to look at in terms of autonomy, and versus human ownership, and how the future could potentially look like. Just thinking about it from your own lens. Thank you.